All right, welcome here, beautiful souls. My name's Rachele, and you're listening to Sovereign Heart. I've got a very, very wonderful, special spiritual guest on the show today. Her name is Tracy, and we met about, I don't know, I guess probably 6 months or so, give or take, in
Yeah.
a business community. And then I just knew I needed to talk to her, and I think the feeling was mutual. And then I am truly blessed and honored to say that I got an Akashic clearing from her. Highly, highly, highly recommend. So welcome here, Tracy.
Thank you so much for having me, Rochelle. I'm so excited to have this conversation today. And I just love being in your energy. So thank you.
Yay! I'm so happy you're here.
Me too.
So the first question I usually start with everyone is, how do you define sovereignty in your terms?
Mm. I love that question. And I also feel like it's such a broad question, right?
Yeah.
Because people see sovereignty in so many different ways. And to me, sovereignty really is a space of living life on my own terms from a space of freedom and liberation. And I think that's where, a lot of the definitions can get a little bit different because my version of freedom and your version of freedom, everyone's version of freedom is going to be different, right? But for me, sovereignty is being completely in my power, making choices from that place of power and no longer subscribing to old outdated systems of sacrifice or servitude or shoulds or people pleasing. It really is living every single day that I have from the place of co-creation with spirit.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. That's so poignant too, because the co-creation with spirit is key. And
Mhm.
really realizing also that we have the freedom and sovereignty within us to connect and co-create with spirit.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
there's a divine union there. And so many people think that's outside of ourselves, but really that's that journey of going inward and tapping inward.
Absolutely it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So you do so many powerful things with your clients. Your multifaceted, multidimensional toolbox is really transformational and powerful. Akashic work to ascension work to intuitive work, healer, guide, mentor, coach. I would love to hear a little bit about your journey into coming into your title of what you do, but also finding your power in what you do. And I imagine, as most healers are in this world, it wasn't an easy journey to get to this point. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that story as well before we start into the other story that you need to stay tuned to because you're going to resonate with as well.
Absolutely. I think, one of the things that I really have resonated with and that I know to be true, and I confirmed it in my Akashic records and all these kinds of things, is that I really am here to be a teacher on so many different levels. And interestingly enough, I started out as an elementary teacher and I
Yeah.
did that, yeah, for about 10 years. And on the tail end or maybe three quarters way through my career after I had my two kids and they were just little toddlers 2 years apart, like 1 and 3, I felt as though I was having like this existential crisis, for lack of a better way to describe it. And I think it's something that a lot of moms go through once you have children, because so much of your time and your attention is all of a sudden given to becoming a parent, plus you're a wife. And I was working full time, and all of the roles that we have to put up with. And well, interesting, I said put up with, but all of the energy that we have to put out into it, right? And I feel like I lost myself.
Yeah.
And so one of the first stepping stones into the spiritual world is I randomly signed up for a yoga teacher training class after never taking any yoga, which is this has
Dive in the deep end.
right. And this has evolved into a pattern of mine where I sign up for things that I've never done before, just knowing that that's the next step. Right. So I sign up for yoga teacher training, having no idea what it holds in store for me, or how much I was going to learn about myself. But that was absolutely the intention. And when I signed up for it, I never had any desire to move forward and actually teach a class. It was purely for my own personal development.
Mm.
And one day my husband was like, "Hey, like, do you think maybe you could just go like sub a couple classes until you make up the money that you spent and break even kind of thing? And I was like, oh, well, all right, fair request kind of thing. And that was what sparked me getting into this world of spirituality. And I was still a teacher at the time. And from there, then I did meditation teacher training, and then I became a Reiki master. And I was lucky enough to have a couple years in my teaching career where I had a special position as part of a pilot project, and I became a mindfulness teacher and coach for the school, which was amazing. And in my opinion, and still to this day is my opinion, that it's much needed in the schools, and these
Oh
tools
yeah.
for self-regulation and, emotional intelligence and resiliency. And this was before mindfulness was like a buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
So it hadn't hit the cover of the Times magazine yet. It hadn't done any of those things. So it was absolutely a bit of a system buster and a bit of an uphill battle, especially with some of the staff. But I did that job for 3 years, and it was amazing. I went to classrooms and, played mindfulness games with kids, and we played with Play-Doh, all of these fun things, because I got to build the curriculum because it didn't exist.
Cool.
And at the end of the 3 years, I had a new principal who didn't believe in mindfulness and had a huge technology agenda. And so the program was dropped. I was put back into the regular classroom. And once I was put back into the regular classroom, is then that I realized that even though I was a natural born teacher, what was most important was what I was teaching. And the Alberta curriculum was not something that I was passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can add to that, all of the other stressors of the job, from, not having enough support, not having enough people, and, the issues that kids struggle with that we aren't trained to deal with. And that would be a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
needless to say, I knew I needed to get out. And so I then enrolled in massage therapy. And so I
Wow.
had two little toddlers. I was teaching, and I also was going to massage school for 2 years. It was pretty intense.
I bet.
But my intention being that if I could build up my massage practice on the side, then I could leave teaching and just replace my income. However, the universe had other plans for me, because I had been saying for probably the last 4 years that I just wanted out. I didn't like where I was. It was really difficult to go to work every day. Not because I didn't like the kids. I love the kids, but because of all of the other, red tape and paperwork and things that went with that. So what ended up happening is I got surplused. So if you don't know what that means, essentially the population has lowered in a school, too many staff. So some people get surplus, meaning they have to move somewhere else in the school division. That's how it works where I live.
Okay.
So they came to me and they said, okay, well, what are you not willing to do, kind of idea? And I said, well, I'm not willing to travel any farther than I already am, which is half an hour each way. And I'm not willing to teach a kindergarten. It's the only grade that I hadn't taught at that point. And in my opinion, kindergarten teachers are not only angels, they're also a special breed.
Oh yeah.
I know my limitations. That is not for me. I do not have that level of patience, or I didn't at that time. So they came back to me about a week later, and they offered me a job that was an hour away, and it was a kindergarten position.
Okay.
And it was just like the universe saying, like, okay, knock, knock, knock. You've been, sitting on this, not taking any action for quite a long time. So we're just going to give you that little extra push or that little extra nudge. Right.
Yep.
So I ended up ending my permanent contract, and I left the school division, and I went over to building my massage practice. And from there, that's really when everything started to open up for me. That's when I discovered spiritual response therapy, which is one of the modalities I do. It's when I discovered the Akashic records. It's when I started to learn about, galactic collectives and all of the different things. And I really got to dive in deep to all of what a lot of people might call the really woo-woo type things. I had my own witch era and practiced that for a while, and got into the goddesses and more into yoga and meditation and all of these different things. And I had kind of used massage therapy as a safety net, or as a springboard for that, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so fast forwarding now over 5 years, I've opened and closed my own studio, and I've built an online business. And now I'm seeped into the world of spirituality. And my astrology chart would tell you that as long as I'm teaching spirituality, I am in my purpose. So,
And you are. So would
yeah.
your human design, by the way.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's quite a, I think a lot of people can relate to a few things you said in there. First of all, the awakening that happens when you become a mother, and
Mhm.
just like realizing like your mission on this planet changes, and there is something incredibly, like, I don't even know how to use words powerful enough about the experience of childbirth, and then the love you feel for these humans that is like uncomprehendable. And then this other moment where the signs were there and not listening until it was like, I'm going to scream at you, is that this opportunity that you've been given is exactly the opposite of what you asked for, so that you do not take this road.
It couldn't have been more clear.
Yeah, yeah. So that's actually a perfect segue into why I really wanted to bring you on today, because you shared on your Instagram a bit about your journey, about recently being in an experience at a group event, having trauma come up from that journey. And why this is a perfect segue is because, and I'd love to hear kind of what you shared with me prior to me turning record on, but you got a divine download and a sign, and then it still led you down the path of having to have this experience. So I would love to hear a bit about the starting off point and a bit of backstory around this experience, because I think a lot of people really need to hear it and understand it, and the importance of being trauma informed in the wellness world, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that aren't.
Absolutely. And, I want to start by saying that what I've come to learn from spending a lot of time in the Akashic Records is that everything happens for a reason.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean that everything is predetermined. But what it does mean is that when we create our soul plan and our divine blueprint, we choose certain, we call them karmas, or some people call them lessons, and whatever word you want to put to that. But the point being that opportunities come forward for us to learn that lesson or to experience that karma. And if we make a choice that kind of bypasses it, where we end up working around it, it shows up in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And I am someone, a lot of times you hear a lot of spiritual teachers and healers talk about how they had major trauma in their lives, right? Like maybe they, suffered abuse when they were a child, or they had some kind of violent attack on them, or they had parents that had addiction issues, or whatever that might be. And I'm happy and grateful that that's never been the case for me. Like my entire life has been pretty like white picket status quo. Like not perfect, but never anything big like that. And so I truly believe on the other side of this trauma that I experienced, that one of the reasons for it was so that I would actually experience it, so
Yeah.
that I would understand my clients on a different level. And so I would also be able to understand how I can help them to heal it and move through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be about, well, it's back in April, I guess. I decided to go to a group healing event where we do shadow work, we do inner work. It's very energetic, it's very spiritual focused. And it was not a new group to me. I'd been going to this group, a couple times a year, sometimes more, since before the world shut down. So it had been probably 2017-ish, maybe.
Oh, yeah,
So
long
I'd been
time.
doing it for a while.
Yeah.
I was very familiar with it, and I knew a lot of people in the community, and had some really great experiences there, and some really profound healing. And prior to the retreat in April, there was one before that back in the fall of 2023, I guess it would be. And for whatever reason, I just got the intuitive nudge. It was like, don't go. Like, I don't need to go. There's no reason for me to be there. So I didn't go. And so when this one came up in April, I was kind of humming and hawing, and I was like, oh, do I go or do I not go? And a really close friend of mine called me up one day, and she never goes to these ever. And she said to me, I think I'm going to go. Like, I'm getting the hit to go. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah. And I was like, all right, let's go then. I've been, a handful of times. Cool. Let's go.
Yeah.
And we had this really fascinating conversation the night before the retreat started, and it was a 5-day retreat. And the night before it started, we were talking about the energies behind the modality. And we were talking about the systems or structures that it's plugged into. Specifically, that there's some religious grids that are involved, and there's some power over power dynamics that are involved. There's still some hierarchy that's involved. And those are grids that I, especially over the last 2 years, not only spent a lot of time unplugging from, but I've talked about a ton on my Instagram and been leading my own clients through these grids of disempowerment, the empath grid, all of these things that kind of really keep us in structure and in a place of disempowerment, which is the opposite of sovereignty, right?
Yes, exactly.
So we were having, and truthfully, I don't even remember the whole conversation. I think that some of the things that I said came through more as a channel transmission because my girlfriend had to remind me of what I had said.
Yep.
But we basically had this conversation about, as we were going into it, to be very mindful to not plug in to these grids of disempowerment, that we were stepping in from a place of sovereignty. Then
Wow.
fast forward to the last day and the night before, I ended up having this traumatic experience where I had said something to the facilitator that he didn't like because it was challenging those grids. It was challenging the sovereignty grid. It was challenging having a hierarchy.
Ah,
And
crazy.
yeah, and I didn't realize the impact of it at the time, but the next morning we all came back together for the final day, and I was called out in front of a group of many, many people rather than having a private conversation.
Oh, no, no, no.
And there was a lot that was said, and essentially the long story short is that I had it ignited trauma within me that came with a lot of blame and shame and guilt and humiliation, and feeling like I had done something wrong, feeling like I was being ostracized or persecuted. And I've done a lot of work of my own around those energies, especially in my Akashic records, because I do have multiple lifetimes of that, especially as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I got super emotional and it really just went into a state of fight or flight.
Yeah.
And so after it was all kind of over, I had people coming up to me and checking up, like, are you okay? And I was literally just like numb. I was like, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Like I literally had checked out of my body and I wasn't even sure what was going on. And I could just feel myself in full survival mode, just being like, just say the right thing, just get through it, just finish. And that's kind of it. Right. Which on the other side of things, I really wish that I would have been able to do something different or to respond differently, but I just went right into that fight, flight, or freeze.
Well, I imagine it was very shocking to have that experience because in an environment where it sounds like it had been really safe and transformational for you in the past,
Mhm.
instead of it being a responsible way to communicate a disagreement or conflict, you were singled out in a group. And that on so many levels immediately plays on those power dynamics
Yeah.
because the group is going to be more for the facilitator inevitably, and it leaves no space for you to have that voice. And I would imagine that you were in shock because why would you ever expect that that would happen? Like,
Yeah.
you're not waiting to be called out, prepared for it. And here it happens and you're frozen, like, of course you are.
Yep. I was absolutely frozen. And what's interesting is when I look at the macrocosm, the big picture of everything now, and I look back at all of the times that I had gone, and not to say that, this was my lesson to learn for sure, because, and I'm not placing blame. I take responsibility that I chose to go, right? I said what I said. I take full responsibility for that. And what I'm also recognizing is that up until that point, the reason that I hadn't had any of those experiences or those issues is because I was plugged into those grids of disempowerment, because I was subscribing to the hierarchy, even if it was subconscious. I was subscribing to the disempowerment, even though it was more subconscious. And because over the last year, especially after the world shut down, I had kind of disengaged with that community and done my own work. I was showing up in a different way, in a different energy, in a different person. And it was no longer in alignment with who I am
Yeah.
and how I choose to do the work, because I was sitting there no longer willing to suffer, to sacrifice, or to serve in order to heal. It was no longer at my own expense.
Yeah, and I think that's such a key differentiation because I've witnessed this in my own journey too, being therapist to coach and also having a spiritual component in all of the work that I do. Like, I love that you're talking about that grid of almost like a grid of consciousness and hierarchy and those really ultimately things that keep us playing a victim. And they're
Yes.
so sneaky and we don't really realize it. And I feel like many people in the wellness world, in the spiritual world, almost wear those things as a badge of honor. Like, my story is the thing that you're going to bond with me over. And this is where my power comes from. And not realizing that it's almost inverting that truth that wants to come out of self-responsibility and sovereignty and, standing in truth. And yet so many people in their journeys, I find, where, and maybe you can speak to this too, but get a bit stuck in that. I've now healed and now I identify as a highly sensitive person who's an empath, who is a feminist, and who is this and this and this, and it becomes like this identity list that validates all the times that you felt powerless. And I think there's a point to that, because the point of that happening, and I don't know how you feel about this, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I feel like there's a point because we're supposed to actually grow through that. You need to give a bit of voice sometimes to the victimized part of you, but then you don't stay there. You grow through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise, you're more of just an empowered victim than you are
Exactly.
in sovereignty,
Yeah.
right? You're just in an empowered victim state, which is super fascinating. And if I'm being perfectly honest, when I started my journey in spirituality, the things that were coming into my field, and it's on me, like I was buying and selling the lies as truth, that I had to earn everything, right? I had to earn my spiritual gifts. I had to earn getting up in the hierarchy. I had to earn my place, and I had to be of service to the teachers, right? Have reverence and honor for the teachers. And not that there's anything wrong with having
Yeah,
reverence and honor for teachers, but from a place of equality, not from a
for
place of
sure.
getting down on my knees because I'm less than or lower than.
Yeah, and I think that those are power structures that have been on this planet
Yeah,
for centuries and centuries now, that have been here to make us feel less connected to divine.
absolutely.
And then that's how they continue to have like hierarchy. And I this is why I always advise my followers, clients, listeners to really practice discernment. And also, like, I know you agree to this, like, Tracy and I are not your gurus. Like,
Nope.
we are not here to tell you the way to be in your life. You are here to find that within yourself. And I believe this, and I know you do too, because I've worked with you. Like, I'm here as a conduit to help you experience like your growth, your expansion, your ascension. And I know you are as well. But sometimes in these group containers, it can become very centered around the facilitator, and
Mhm.
it becomes very quickly like everything they say is the right thing, because again, we've been so conditioned to seek power outside of self, and like, well, you created this thing and I'm coming here to learn from you, so you must be the one that knows more than me.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that was a conversation that I had on the other side of this too, was that part of the reason that I really wanted to talk about it and bring it out into the open, it wasn't about calling other people out or pointing fingers at all. But what was interesting is, number one, I made a couple posts on Instagram. I think I've made 3 posts in total. I posted on Facebook too. And I can't even tell you how many messages I had in my
Yeah.
DMs from women saying,
Yeah.
oh my God, the same thing happened to me. A version of this happened to me. And I've never talked about it. And I've been hiding ever since.
Yes.
And that to me that is just not okay. That is absolutely not okay. And there's also the fact that that experience, even though it was directed specifically towards me, it left an energetic imprint on every single person that was there.
Yeah.
So whether that imprint was that they agreed with the facilitator and they decided to plug into that grid, that's one, right? Whether it was that they experienced the same thing I experienced and left with shame, blame, and guilt and re-triggered trauma, that's another experience. If they were new to the work, then maybe they left thinking, oh, this is what doing inner work and healing is supposed to be like, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Every single person there left with some kind of imprint.
Yeah. And I think that's why this is so important to talk about, because similar to what you were seeing on your Instagram, I personally firsthand know of two different experiences of what you described. So, experience one, which is very similar to you, I know women who have gone to beautiful masculine and feminine tantra-ish retreats. And again, um, women left feeling disempowered. There's moments of perverting the truth, essentially, of what the intention is behind it. Sexual energy, which is extremely spiritual, but also can be very distorted very quickly. So a lot of these women have shared stories with me about like being kind of confronted, assaulted, touched, like come on by the facilitator in those experiences. It's a very vulnerable, intimate container when you're bringing those parts of your feminine out that perhaps you haven't ever allowed out before. And then, even in some of my schooling, I remember we had a teacher who his mission in life was to basically confront people and make them triggers so that they wouldn't be triggered in their career moving forward, which I genuinely actually don't feel like he was doing anything maliciously, but it certainly was not done in a trauma-informed way. And this was someone in a coaching and counseling school, and I witnessed it multiple times. And he's no longer there. It's for a reason, because it was just too off the rails. He felt like it was his mission in life to call people out on their shit that they weren't seeing. But there's a way to do that delicately, and it's extremely triggering to do that in a group container. And then I can speak to my own experience of journeying into my masculine and feminine as well. The facilitator wasn't traumatizing, but the experience traumatized me, in the fact that there was no speaking to, when we are in our bodies, your past stuff can come up so easily. And even though they were facilitating a beautiful container, I personally left feeling more blocked and resistant towards my femininity, because I felt like, what's wrong with me that I don't feel safe closing my eyes dancing with a male stranger? Well, like, and then I'm like, I feel bad that I can't be my feminine, right? So all these variety of experiences where, again, I can't speak to yours, but I do believe that there is a conscious part of the facilitator that is not trying to cause harm, but there is a subconscious energy of, again, that power struggle and taking advantage of people that are coming in a vulnerable space. And what do you do in those spaces if, say, the facilitator doesn't recognize the signs of trauma?
Yeah. Well, and as far as a facilitator myself, if there's something that is happening that is taking me off my center where I can no longer facilitate, then I need to step back. I need to have a backup plan. I need to do something else. I don't still step into the space
Mm-hmm.
and basically energetically project all my shit onto whoever is there, right? Like, to me, that lacks in integrity.
Yes.
Right?
And one of the things I admire about you is how spiritually responsible you are with your energy, which I
Mhm.
actually think the ego and the spiritual voice are like super closely connected,
They are.
and it can stop us from tapping into our gifts, but it also, that voice can get very sneakily like, well, you're the only one that can save this person, so it doesn't matter how you feel today or what you just went through, you have to save them.
Yeah. Savior.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And there's a massive savior complex on this planet right now, big time. Like, and again, on a I don't even know how to rank it or rate it. The intention behind it is meaning well, but when you go deeper into it, you realize the level of facilitators and healers and gurus and coaches that are operating from that grid of narcissism, saviorism.
Yeah.
You know, I'm ashamed, but I'm going to present my biggest ego forward so that you don't know how much shame I'm holding because I did something I wasn't supposed to do, or, oh, like convince themselves that what they're doing is natural and spiritual and this is their special thing that they do to clear your energy. And
Yeah. One of the comments I've heard a lot is, well, this is the work.
right.
And for a long time, I also believed that that was the work. And I think that that's why I've had to have that experience. I didn't believe that going in anymore, but I believe that the reason that it happened for me is because I needed to clean out any of those kind of remnants or those really deep pieces within me.
Mm,
And, as I look back on that, like I'm still bringing myself back to 100% after that traumatic experience, because it didn't just affect me emotionally, my hormones went completely awry. I lost my period for 3 months.
wow.
I had, lots of energetic work to do. I had to lean on people that I feel are safe for me to do, you know, energy clearing and to do Akashic work and galactic work. Like there was so much, and I did it on all levels and layers. I had to take care of my physical body in a way that I never have before because of all of this trauma. And with all of those women that messaged me, that stepped forward and said me too, one of the things that really stuck out to me after I got, after I processed the fact that this was actually happening all over the place, which I was just astounded by,
Yeah.
the next piece was, what if it had been someone else? Because I walked away as a person who has many of her own tools in her toolbox and many people in her world to ask for support, and people who also could recognize when I needed it, when I couldn't ask for myself. But not everybody has that. Not everybody has tools. Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody else has support systems. So not everybody else knows how to listen to their body enough to actually follow the signs and figure out what to do. And that's a huge issue for me, because what about all of those people?
Yeah. Which actually is a great piece to talk on. So what were some of the signs that you noticed that you were going into a traumatic triggered nervous system response? What now, when you reflect back, what showed up for you personally?
The first thing was, especially like immediately, it was this feeling of like I was there, but I was not there. Like I could recognize that my body was there in that space. I could hear myself speaking, but it was almost like I was watching myself in a way. It was like I had detached from my body in a way to keep myself safe, which is something that I've heard a lot of my clients who have had really large trauma in their lives talk about, right? Is that they disassociate, they
Yeah.
disconnect.
Yeah.
That would have been the first thing. The second thing was I was not only highly emotional, but it was uncontrolled emotion. And
Uh,
I literally could feel myself just shut down. I could feel myself just like lock it all down, and that was it. And it was the mindset of like, just get through it. Just get through it. Just get
in the
through
moment you were noticing that, or after the fact?
it in the moment.
Yeah.
It's like, just get through, just get through, just get through. And then I went through a period, honestly, of really feeling like the first story I went into that I had to pull myself out of was that I was wrong and I did something wrong. The shame was the strongest for me. right? It was this shame of, I did something wrong, I offended people, I am wrong, and now I'm being, ejected or thrown out, we could say, of the group, kind of thing, right? Nobody said anything. Everybody just listened,
Wow.
right? Which is an interesting concept too. And not to place blame on anybody. I don't, but it's also interesting from a microcosm to a macrocosm. You can see how other things in our world play out when you just take a small situation like that, right? And you see what happens.
And so in the moment, you observed almost like an out-of-body
Yeah.
experience. You noticed yourself feel extremely emotional, but didn't feel safe to allow the emotion to take over. And then you're telling yourself, like, just get this over with, just get this over with, get through it.
Yeah.
And then also realizing when you look around the room, no one else was advocating for me. And those are like really like punch in your face and in your gut, like trauma moments. And I think a lot of women listening to this can relate to that in so many different scenarios, because that exact same experience happens with sexual assault and abuse. That exact same experience happens even in the school system. If you were called out, like you were a teacher, but imagine if you were the teacher that would pull out the kid that wasn't getting the concept that you were teaching, how that instantly makes them feel those exact same ways. And when we feel that way, what did we just hear? Well, the whole body shuts down and the body isn't safe anymore. And then when our body wasn't safe anymore, in your case, this is why it's so important to understand how powerfully interconnected our feminine essence is to our nervous system and to our emotional state. Because like you said, hormones were impacted, health was impacted. And I've been doing this work for 10 years and a lot of the most expansive, amazing, divine women that I've come across have been through major adversity with their sexuality and femininity, and then had a health crisis, and now are truly standing in that place of power. And I think so many people don't realize that those health issues that, we just go, oh, well, it's just stress. It's just something that came up. But there is almost guaranteed a turning point in our life, whether that was when you were 14 or when you're 45. Like there's a turning point where something shifts. And because you're so tapped in and tuned in, you knew that was very clear that this was because of this. But so many people don't realize that those subtle things that aren't so subtle that we push down since childhood are the very things that are showing up in our physical bodies today.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is very much a part of, like in my world, because I do a little bit more on the spiritual side, there's often a lot of conversation around things like, I just feel stuck. I can't move forward on my journey. I'm not taking the moves. I'm stagnant. I don't know what to do, kind of thing. And this is actually, in a lot of ways, trauma aside, where the rubber meets the road, sort of speak.
Yeah.
From the perspective that we have these subtle bodies. So we have the physical, we have the mental, we have the emotional, energetic, and we have the spiritual, and they all impact each other. They're all constantly communicating with each other. And for lack of a better phrase, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yeah.
So what happens is, as humans, is we have a tendency to favor one or two of those bodies because we enjoy them, because they feel easier. So that might mean you're the person that you take really great care of your body, you eat really good, you go to the gym, you move, you do all of those things, but you're disconnected from spirit. You're not doing your spiritual practices. You might be someone who's more connected to spirit, but you're stuffing down all of your emotions, whatever that might be, right? All of these bodies have to harmonize together. Yeah. And that's how you create the capacity to hold your healing. When you go and you do your healing and you say something later down the road, like, well, it's happening again. I thought I dealt with this already. Now I'm dealing with this again. I mean, there is other options. It could be that, you didn't clear to the point of origin. It could be that the contract isn't complete, but it also could be that on all levels and layers, you didn't have the capacity to hold the healing.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies with trauma, right? It's all levels and all layers. We
Yeah.
have to regulate the nervous system so that we can actually access our intuition. We have to express our emotions so that our physical body isn't showing the symptomology of getting sick.
Yeah.
All connected.
And I think that's so, so incredibly important to actually embody, because this is what the difference between living from sovereignty versus living from that energy of like life is happening to me
Mm-hmm.
versus for me.
Yeah.
It's a different mindset shift. And when you realize that everything's connected, and I understand too, and I have compassion for this, that that can be very daunting and overwhelming to like grasp if this is your first time or early in your journey of healing these concepts. So it can feel very overwhelming, but that's why people like Tracy and I are here talking about this, because even though we don't do the same work, it's so symbiotic, because your work helps people truly tap into the subtle bodies, the energy bodies, the spiritual bodies that mainstream is now talking more holistically. Like there is a more narrative about the word holistic and living naturally. But sometimes there is an energetic component that just doesn't make sense and it's just stuck. Like I can speak to, and you don't even need to remember this because you probably don't, but in my reading with you, we had to clear out religious programming because that was in my soul journey. In order to clear out that religious programming to feel safe to be fully expressed in my sovereignty and in my woo and my spiritual beliefs, because part of my journey is to speak forward more of the truth of the planet and own my own inner divinity and not feel like it's some god in the sky far from me that I have to kind of, you know, worship and he has all the answers, instead of realizing like, my gosh, as women we are the universe incarnated in human form. And like I grasp that concept, but to embody that concept is a whole other ballgame. And these are the components of my journey of doing so much work to realize like, oh yeah, this is like a huge piece like for me. And maybe you've seen this with some of your clients, but in my schooling, I healed the mental and emotional so deeply. It was a very experiential schooling. And then I went through a health crisis. And
Mm-hmm.
my physical body was like, okay, you're dealing with your emotions and your feelings, and now we're going to get the body on board. And so my body came on board, and there was always a curiosity for spirituality in my world. I went to church and I often thought in my head, well, that's a human perspective about a human experience. And I don't know if I agree with that. You know, that was my kind of discerning mind growing up. But then I realized in the physical healing that it was so deeply connected to the spiritual components. And when you are in a health crisis, like there is nothing more you can do but lean on the spiritual to get you through that. And this is just my journey, and I'm curious to hear your experience or awareness of it. But do you think there's a deep connection between the spiritual and the physical that way? Like as like they just seem so interconnected in the process on the journey of healing. I see this with my clients. Like we start with the awarenesses and they have the aha moments in their mind, and then we start doing more embodiment work, and suddenly almost like it's like things click and they're like, oh shit. like like I'm awakening to something outside of myself.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that to be true. And, like, you can always make a connection. Like, I can't even tell you how many times I've been talking to a client and they'll say something like, oh, my family member or whatever was diagnosed with cancer. And we have a conversation and I say, well, did you know that one of the energetics behind cancer is self-destruction? Right. Or, we talk about thyroid cancer, right? And the thyroid being at the space of the throat and being a struggle to express self and to communicate to self. They're absolutely connected. And I think that one of the biggest lies that we've bought and sold is that we as human vessels are separate from spirit.
Yeah.
And when we get to that point in our ascension journey, when we can come to believe and to know that they are actually in not only interconnected, but they're in complete union, that
Yeah.
is when the real healing starts to happen.
Yeah. I read somewhere because a lot of quotes are like, you know, I am a human having a divine experience or a spiritual
Yeah.
experience, but in reality, I am spirit having a human experience. And that shifts the mindset there too. But imagine if everyone on this planet operated that way and realized, like, I am spirit having a human experience. Oh, it would be amazing. And this planet would be so much
Yeah.
kinder, lovelier.
Totally. I've been saying for years that we are spiritual beings having a human experience,
Yeah.
and that's part of the information that comes from the Akashic records and from divine blueprints and soul plans and whatnot, right? Is that
Mhm.
we are all soul beings that have chosen to be here in human incarnate, not the other way around,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And so speaking to that humanness of it all, what were some of the things that post retreat helped you step back into your body? Because when you were frozen in those moments, we have one of two choices, right? You can stay and pretend like everything's okay, which sometimes, and this is not a judgment to this, some people need to do that to survive. And
Yeah.
so you were surviving. If you were frozen and are frozen right now, there's a reason that you stayed frozen.
Yeah.
And Tracy, because you do this work and have been for so long, when this moment occurred, it sounds like it gave you a whole layer of compassion and empathy towards trauma, but did it also give you empathy towards your physical body and how it responds to these scary experiences that show up in our physical reality?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about healing when we go back to the subtle bodies too is the physical body is the most densest, right? It's the actual existence on this planet, if you will. So when we're moving through our healing, the physical body is always the slowest, I guess, for lack of a better
Mhm.
word, right?
Yep.
So when I came out of this, the first thing that I did is I did go to the energetic and spiritual work first because I could feel there, it was like a cloak, it was like a heavy cloak over top of my energy field. And it was like, as long as that was there, I couldn't even like come up
Mhm.
for air, if you will. That was how it felt to me. So I went into the energy work first and I pulled back the projections and the, the judgments and the expectations and things like that. And I worked through the Akashic pieces and unplugged from some energy grids and things like that. And from there, most of it did become about my physical body. And before I could go fully into my physical body, I really had to have a lot of conversation out loud with someone else around my emotions
Mm.
and processing the experience. And I
Yeah.
had moments of pure anger, and wanting to blame people. I'm not going to lie about that at all, right? Like I stepped into
Understandable.
power victim for a while, right? I got all of the DMs from other women and I got enraged and I was like, what the fuck? Like this
Yeah.
should not be happening, right? I had those moments. And I also had moments of hurt and of trauma because I had friends in that room. I
Yeah.
I had close friends in that room who we are no longer friends
Oh,
now. And
yeah.
so there was an added layer of grief there and of processing to do as well. And in order for me to be able to step in my own sovereignty, there was relationships that I had to let fall away. And I had to be really discerning and careful about my own energy field. And
Mhm.
that meant that certain people couldn't have access to it.
Yeah.
And that's something that we often feel guilty about, right? To not have a conversation with someone or to block them on social media or whatever those things are, right? It was literally about self-healing and self-preservation, and I could only allow people into my field in any way that were safe for me,
Yeah.
and that included my body.
Yeah.
And so stepping more into the physical, I knew my body just felt completely imbalanced and off. And so I really had to get back to doing things that were going to not only get my hormones back online, but that were
Mhm.
going to regulate my nervous system. So getting outside in nature, I started walking 2 or 3 times a day. I started hydrating my body more, putting like salt in the water to use as electrolytes and things like that. And I had to be very careful about the food that I was putting in my body. And I had to give myself time
Yeah.
because it wasn't a day that it took to get back in balance. It wasn't a week. It was months. Like it's now August and this happened in April.
Yeah.
And I didn't even start talking about it till July. Right. I had to step back and give myself the time and the grace to just move through the process and to take those steps every day to get outside in the sun as well. I did some infrared, like some hot yoga. I've done some cold therapy, things like that as well to bring myself back into balance.
You know, I think that's something that we're not really told because it's not an easy sell
Mm-hmm.
that healing the nervous system is as slow as it needs to be. Because imagine if it was as fast and as instant as the shock, like we wouldn't integrate it,
Yeah.
right? And so giving ourselves grace on that journey, if you are healing from a traumatic experience, to realize that you're not going to magically wake up one day and feel instantly better. I'm sure you've had crazy ups and downs
Yeah.
of days where you're like, oh, finally I can breathe. And then the next day you're like, I can't breathe, or I
Mm-hmm.
can't speak the thing, or why am I having this thought that isn't mine, like overruling my day? And this is the healing journey. This is the process. And this is also the journey of unraveling the layers to get to the root of the issue and going through that commitment to self. And that self commitment showing up in your relationships with others, but also with Tracy, it sounds like was also very healing for your nervous system because you step back into your power again.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I've said to my clients for quite a long time, even before this ever happened, is they say, how long will it take?
Yeah.
Right? Or how can we accelerate this or whatever, right? And often I'll say, we'll move as fast as you're willing to move, as fast as you have the capacity to move.
Mm-hmm.
And people like to think it's like, well, okay, if it's energy work, like it's speed of the light, like I can go. If it's spiritual work, I can go. And it's like, well, yes. And how fast is your body willing to go?
Exactly. And
Right?
that can also get bypassy real fast,
Yep.
which is part of the issue, which I think is why I really wanted to talk to you specifically about this, is because you are so immersed in the spiritual and I saw you showing up for your physical. And I think that's something that doesn't get showcased a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bypassing an emotional experience and bypassing a physical experience because somewhere along the line, someone had a judgment around this emotion is bad and going to bring down my vibe and I can't feel it because if I feel it, then I must be yada, 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 whatever story there is. But even you were saying, like, we're not here to blame or shame other people. And at the same time, I needed to voice the anger. I needed to voice the feeling a victim for a while. I needed to voice that, and not judging that within ourselves when we do that, I think is so incredibly important. And if I think about, what a child needs when they're upset, right? The child is not screaming a temper tantrum saying, fix me, mom. They're mad about something. And imagine like how much easier it is when you go, I see that you're upset. And then they say why they're upset. Oh, you're upset because Sally stole your toy. Yeah, that's so frustrating. And then suddenly they start sniffling and they're not screaming anymore because they feel seen and heard. And then you're not there saying, shush, 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 don't cry, don't cry. You're saying, of course you're crying. That is really sad and scary. And like, I can see why you would be upset that this happened to you. And it starts to like calm the body down, like, oh, she's not going to yell at me for yelling. And when we do that to our adult self who's emoting, that's how our bodies start to trust ourselves again. But most of us weren't raised by a parental figure that is as patient as we needed. And again, humans raising humans, this is where we kind of go like, who's here to say what's good or bad, what they didn't know. And at the same time, that's why it's so important to do that work when we're healing as adults, whether that's a therapist, a coach, a healer, a mentor giving you that reflection first so that you learn to talk to yourself that way through the journey as well.
Absolutely. And I think too, Rochelle, like I had mentioned that I had the friend that decided to go out of the blue that never goes, right? And she was absolutely one of the most solid um, people that I had to really lean into. And we had many, many conversations about it. And she was able to hold space for me in a way where it wasn't like, oh my God, are we talking about this again? Right. Like she just kept showing up for me. And I will always be grateful for her for that. And what's interesting about that, as you talk about being seen and heard, and if it hadn't have been for her, I wouldn't have had a way
Right.
to feel really seen and heard. Like, yes, I could have gone to, other people that I do work with, but no one else in that circle did I ever hear from. And when we have a traumatic experience that is never addressed or is never, apologized, where there is no reconciliation, it's kind of in a way like we're left hanging. And a lot
Yeah.
of the women that sent me messages because of my posts, they said a version of that. They said, this happened to me and I haven't spoke about it. I haven't told anybody because I'm
Yeah.
so ashamed,
Yeah.
because they think it's their fault. And that's the part that's really heartbreaking to me, is that they think that it's their fault. Right.
And that's because in my experience, when we get triggered, we go back to little kid version
Mhm.
of self, and the child version does not separate self from emotions. And
Yeah.
so they're hearing an experience that happens to them, and our inner dialogue is, I am bad.
Yeah.
I am at fault.
Yeah.
I did something wrong to cause this person to do this to me.
Mhm.
And I can only imagine how healing it was for you to have a friend who could genuinely like validate your journey because they witnessed what happened. And this is where sometimes it can be challenging and take a bit more time and grace when you're working with, like some of my clients, for example, have a hard time hearing me when the first time I say, it wasn't your fault.
Mhm.
It wasn't your fault. The first time I say it, they usually don't believe me. I have to say it like 10, 20, 30 times, and they share all the different excuses and stories that their inner child's telling them to validate it was my fault. But if it wasn't your fault, right, then their adult brain goes, well, then I was a victim, and then I can't lean into that narrative because I don't like how that feels in my body, because then that makes me feel weak.
Yeah.
But then you don't realize that when you honor and surrender to that feeling of like, oh shit, this did happen to me,
Mhm.
the other side of that is where you're at, and what we're talking about now is this also happened for me, to drop people in my life that aren't in alignment anymore, to realize my limitations and how to have like a group of support or referrals around me who are trauma informed, to maybe get more trauma informed in my studies, to also have empathy for what's coming up for other people, because now, I think the least recognizable nervous system response, like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, is freeze.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because the whole point of it is you can't tell that I'm shutting down inside. I'm still here, but not really here. Whereas obviously fight, you're going to scream back.
Mhm.
Flee, you're running away and leaving, or right? And fawn, you're like, let me just make it better. I'm going to make everything okay. But
Yeah.
the freeze response is, I think, the most misunderstood. And I have so much compassion because I think so many women's bodies do that to stay alive. I will never, ever, ever say like silence is violence. I do not agree with that statement. It's been overused and in the wrong ways, because silence sometimes has kept people alive.
Mhm. Yeah.
Silence has, and so again, you're not bad or wrong for having a freeze response, because had you reacted in that moment, you might have been even more ostracized and attacked from multiple different angles, and then it could have gone even bigger or louder or worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that moment, you did exactly what your body knew to do to keep you in a state
Yeah.
that your body knew that you could recover from.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, it's an interesting journey and a shift in perspective to move from victim into a space of, this is happening. And I would say not only did it happen for me, but it happened through me. Like
Yeah.
I had the conversation with my friend and in a lot of ways predicted. I didn't know how it was going to come up, but I kind of predicted it in a way which is so fascinating,
Mhm.
right? In a lot of ways. And if we circle back to the conversation about working with all levels and layers and how our body is actually responding, what I would share from a more spiritual vantage point is that when I work with my clients, almost all of them, the body that they forget about is the physical.
Yeah.
I actually just did in July with my group, my mentorship women who are with me for an entire year. And because of everything that's happened to me, I brought forward this new level of calibration and getting them to evaluate and look at where they are on each level. Where are you spiritually, energetically, physically, etc. And almost every woman there had the aha and the realization that they've forgotten about their body,
Yeah.
that they've been ignoring the signs from their body,
Yeah.
that they don't feel good on a daily basis, that they wake up with headaches or they're exhausted, they're tired, they're stressed, whatever that might be. They've recognized that they have, addictions that don't serve them, that they need to stop drinking so much coffee, or they need to drink more water, or they need to give up sugar, like really the foundations of health.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gets missed most in the spiritual world often. And that's what keeps us from moving forward in that path of ascension, which is leading us to that space of sovereignty.
Yeah, the body's not ready to go with you,
Yeah.
because when you're waking up to those parts of yourself, you better damn be grounded,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and your body better be prepared to expand.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those, what you just described, are coping strategies
Mm-hmm.
from and developed from a trigger that became a survival strategy, which is now, well, this is my soothing way of comforting myself.
Yeah.
Ironically, this is again societal conditioning. I think a lot of women, quote unquote, cope by caring for everyone else but themselves.
Yeah.
And there they come last.
Mm-hmm.
And I speak to my clients a lot about finding their voice and their women's alignment, their femininity alignment. And one of the hardest concepts to grasp is to become the main character of the story, no matter if they're a mother, a wife, a colleague, a boss. It doesn't matter. You're meant to lead with your energy. And if it's not working for you, you are the catalyst for your life
Yeah.
and the energy of your dynamics that you're co-creating. And I think that's a really challenging truth to come to terms with, because it's way easier to say, well, I was just raised to take care of everyone first and they need me, so I have to.
And that's where coping becomes bypassing.
Precisely.
Right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it can go so easily into that without realizing it. And I think a lot of girls are raised to just emulate their mothers and emulate stories they see on TV and all these narratives.
Yeah.
And essentially they're stuck in this, I want more from life, but my body won't let me receive it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you say to the woman that's listening to this and going like, yep, that's me? How would you support them in like their physical body saying yes to more attention?
I think the first thing that's important is for a lot of women, we need to destroy and uncreate this notion of self-care that we now have out there. And not that I don't think self-care is important, but I think it's become this buzzword that we kind of use, that we don't have a lot of attention and intention in,
Mhm.
right? It's become kind of just a thing that we can do. And we say, oh, I go get one massage a month, or I, whatever. We need to expand how we're looking at this. And we need to actually approach it from the vantage point of that attention and that intention to ourselves needs to come on a daily basis. And it needs to come first. That we need to take radical responsibility for ourselves, for our own energy fields, for our body, for the situations that we're in. And we need to be honest, right? That it's the ascension code of truth, is that we need to stop bypassing and we need to really look at, okay, where am I avoiding? Where am I playing aloof? Where am I denying what's really going on here? And to find those blind spots. And those blind spots often sit in the foundations of health. And that's not about the medications that we take or the massage that we have once a month. It's about how we truly take care of our bodies. And that's in all ways. That's in movement. That's in what we choose to put into our bodies. That's in the environments that we surround ourselves with, whether that's a person or a place. It's the things that we say yes to, the things that we say no to. There is a real whole, and when I say whole, I mean WHOLE, holistic approach that we need to look at that happens on all levels and layers.
Yeah.
A lot of women will have their blind spots in the physical realm. Some will have it more in the emotional realm. Everyone will be different, but we really need to be looking at all of those layers and levels and looking for where we actually need to put more care and time and attention so that we can harmonize them together.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the hardest thing is that the physical, like you said earlier, moves the slowish-ist. Like, and so when we aren't getting those instant hits of results or awarenesses because you're just like, why am I doing this breath work? I'm not feeling the way I'm supposed to be feeling, or I'm not noticing that I'm getting better at yoga. You're not meant to notice. This is what I often remind people of. If you're not noticing, but you're still doing it, it's working and it's being embodied, rather than I had this huge, amazing, transformational moment and I just was like, so the thing happened and it changed. Subtle change is the change you don't notice, but is the most integrated and embodied. And I think that's why it's so good. Like, I'm not all for like before and after photos of working out, but there's a reason why it's so shocking to people. Like, you don't realize the subtleties that your body is going through, and you need that. Our mind sometimes needs that proof. That's why it's powerful to work alongside a mentor or coach, or be in a container where they can be like, you remember what you told me 6 months ago? And now you're saying this like completely on your own. And they're like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is like, I think when we're tuned in and slowing down, then we can hear our bodies more. And at the same time, listen to what people are reminding you of around you. That's what I'll say as well, because people feel it. You'll start attracting different connections and conversations, right? You'll start experiencing new opportunities, and it will seem like it comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But I think in my personal experience, connecting to and committing to self is what brought the most exponential growth.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like, especially in the more spiritual realm, that sometimes there's like this curse of instant gratification.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, I can just go to this energy session, or I can just go do this Akasha clearing, or I can just do, and then I'm good. It's all good. Then I'm done. Right. And a lot of times we forget that we're still human. Even though we're doing the energy work, even though we're doing the spiritual work, we're still human. So if you want to get better at playing the piano, what do you have to do? You have to show up to the piano. You have to sit down. You have to learn the notes. You have to practice on a consistent, regular basis. And whether it's healing or spirituality or learning human design or whatever it is, it works the same way. And the more that you practice, the more that all of the bodies, including your physical body, will attune to that new frequency.
Yes.
Right. So we need to destroy and uncreate all of the points of view and the judgments and the perceptions around things being, immediate, or that if I don't see results in a week, it's not working, because it's just like you said, it's often very, very subtle, right?
Yeah.
It's very, very subtle. And it's the commitment that's going to get us through to the other side. And so if we,
Devotion, right?
yeah, it
Is the utmost level of love we can give to ourselves.
absolutely. And I saw this really powerful quote a while back, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but the quote essentially was, you'll know what you're committed to based on your results, not based on what you say you're committed to.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a poignant reminder to realize that we have the power of choice.
Hmm.
We have the responsibility of choice.
Yeah.
And there, this is what I'll say to women. I might have men listening, but to women I'll speak to, because it ties back into what we were talking about earlier. How many experiences have we been rushed too fast, too soon, too much? My body's not ready. I can't. And you do it anyway because you think you should.
Mm.
That can be eating food because someone has a timeline. That could be sex. That can be a traumatic experience where you're being called out, rushed too soon, too fast, right? If your growth work happened that way, it would just keep doing the same thing to you that you don't want to be done to you. So if the person you're seeing is too fast, too soon, too rushed, that might not feel good to your nervous system. And I think a lot of the feminine experience really is in learning how to slow down so that we can be in our bodies and connect to our energetic divinity. And, it's why sometimes I see so many women admire this idea of being fed grapes and just like living a life of luxury. And oh, I just feel like prancing on the beach today. And it's like, imagine if we created a lifestyle where we could be slow enough in our day to day to integrate that feeling in every aspect: business, love, day to day life. Like, how different would our lives look and feel?
Yeah. The divine presence of it all.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this feels like a good time to start wrapping things up, but I wanted to leave space. Was there anything more that you wanted or feel called to add as far as your journey goes in healing this experience?
I think it would just be, a reminder to anyone that might be listening, if they've had this experience, if someone else has had this experience, that they know that first of all, it's coming back home to yourself and remembering who you really are, and that not everything is about you or is your fault, and that you always have the capacity to transform it.
Yes.
Right? And the remembrance that everything is happening for us and through us, even the things that we don't choose. Because just because it happened doesn't mean that you chose it or you created it. But what comes out on the other side is absolutely up to you.
Yeah. Powerful. And I will say, I will leave Tracy's contact information in all the details, but if you're listening to this and something really hit home for you, or you just know you need to reach out, please don't feel like you need to go through this experience entirely on your own. That's what we're here for. So please do not hesitate to reach out. We touched on a lot of sensitive subjects today. So listen to your body and intuition and do what feels best for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One final question that I ask all my guests, and this is maybe one you want to tap into. What is one truth from your heart that you feel the world needs to hear right now?
Mhm. I think that a really important truth for everyone on the planet is that your role here on this planet, first and foremost, is to understand and to know and to connect to your own truth, even if it's different than the person next to you.
Mm.
Yeah.
and boldly and courageously do that.
Yes. Unapologetically do that.
Unabashedly,
Mhm.
audaciously step into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I so resonate with that. Tracy's got a lot of fascinating and interesting ways you can connect with her. She's got a Telegram channel as well as some membership stuff and amazing tools to support your growth and ascension journey. So I'll share that all in the show notes, but I really want to thank you, Tracy, for this powerful, poignant conversation. I think a lot of people will feel seen and validated in this and normalized too, as much as that word has been vilified, but really ultimately people who do the work can still get triggered and traumatized. I mean, here we are, and it's like, this is the lesson that I needed to learn now. And that's what life threw at you to learn.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for inviting me and for using your platform to have this conversation and just for believing in the importance of it the way that I do. I honor you so much.
My pleasure. Well, thank you again, Tracy. And I'm sure this probably won't be the last time our guests will be hearing you on my podcast. There's so much more we could talk about.
Amazing. I'm here for it.
Yay. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.